Pachelbel's cannon played for the fourth time, the notes echoing off the cathedral's vaulted ceiling like a slowly tightening noose. My grandmother's lace gown clung to my skin, yellowed with age and heavy with the weight of expectations I could no longer bear. The white roses on the altar had begun to wilt, their petals browning at the edges, and I wondered distantly if anyone else noticed how the fragrance had turned from sweet to sickly. Declan was 42 minutes late. "He's probably just stuck in traffic," my maid of honor, Sienna, murmured behind me, but her voice lacked conviction. The 200 guests filling St. Catherine's Cathedral had long since stopped pretending to check their phones politely. Now they simply stared, their pity so thick I could taste it on my tongue like copper. The priest cleared his throat for the third time, checking his watch with the careful diplomacy of a man who'd witnessed this particular tragedy before. "Perhaps we should." My phone vibrated against my thigh where I'd hidden it in the folds of tulle. I shouldn't have looked. Some part of me knew that the moment I read whatever message waited there, everything would shatter irreparably. "I'm sorry. I can't marry you. They're coming for me. Tell Margot I love her." The words blurred. My $180,000 in student loans. The gallery position I'd lost. The desperate, foolish hope that Declan's consulting work would save us both. All of it crumbling like aged fresco beneath my conservation tools. I started, but my voice cracked. The cathedral's heavy oak doors exploded open. The sound cut through the organ music like a blade, and every head turned in perfect unison. A man stepped through the threshold, backlit by the autumn sun streaming through the doorway, flanked by 6 men in black suits whose very stillness radiated menace. He moved down the center aisle with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd never been told no, his footsteps echoing in the sudden, breathless silence. Dark hair, sharp suit, eyes that found mine across the crowd with the precision of a predator selecting prey. The organ stopped mid-measure. No one moved. No one breathed. And when he spoke, his voice carried a faint accent that made my blood run cold. "Where is Declan Mercer?" The silence that followed his question was absolute. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The stranger's gaze swept across the congregation with the cold efficiency of someone cataloging exits and threats, before settling on the empty space beside me where Declan should have been standing. I asked a question. His voice dropped lower, quieter, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Where is Declan Mercer?" The priest found his voice first, though it trembled. "I'm afraid the groom has been delayed. Perhaps you could." Delayed. The man's laugh was sharp and humorless. He reached into his jacket and I heard gasps ripple through the pews. But what he withdrew wasn't a weapon. It was a leather portfolio, expensive and worn. "Declan Mercer isn't delayed. He's a thief. And he's run." My legs threatened to give out. Sienna's hand gripped my elbow, the only thing keeping me upright. He walked closer, his footsteps measured and deliberate on the marble floor. His men remained at the entrance, hands folded, faces expressionless. As he passed the front pews, I saw older guests shrink back, instinctively recognizing something predatory in his movements. "On March 15th, he continued, opening the portfolio, Declan Mercer secured a contract with the Savelli Art Foundation to oversee the restoration of 17 Italian Renaissance paintings valued at $8.2 million. He pulled out a document, holding it up so the front rows could see the signatures. He received an advance of $3.5 million to cover materials, expert consultation and laboratory work. My mouth went dry. I'd known Declan worked in art consulting. He told me about the big commission, how it would change everything for us. By June, not a single painting had been touched. Not one conservator hired. Not one laboratory invoice submitted. The man's accent grew more pronounced with each word, something Eastern European that I couldn't quite place. The money was moved through 7 shell accounts before disappearing into a cryptocurrency wallet that went dark 3 days ago. There must be some mistake. I heard myself say, though my voice sounded distant, detached from my body. His eyes locked onto mine for the first time, and I understood why people in the pews had recoiled. They were dark, calculating, empty of mercy. No mistake, Miss Ashford. The fact that he knew my name sent ice down my spine. Your fiancé embezzled $3.5 million from my family. He forged documents, falsified reports, and when my accountants began asking questions last week, he gestured to the empty altar. He ran. He climbed the 3 steps to where I stood frozen, close enough now that I could see the flecks of gray at his temples, the scar that bisected his left eyebrow. Close enough to smell his cologne, something dark and expensive that spoke of old money and older violence. So here's what's going to happen, Verity. My name in his mouth felt like ownership. Declan Mercer owes me a debt. Since the coward isn't here to pay it himself. He reached out, his fingers brushing the wilted roses in my bouquet, and smiled, a smile that never reached his eyes. You'll take his place. The vestry smelled of old incense and older secrets. Pietro's men had cleared the small room with brutal efficiency, positioning themselves at both doors like sentinels. Through the carved wooden panels, I could hear the congregation's panicked murmurs, the scrape of pews as guests debated whether to flee or stay. I stood in the center of the cramped space, still clutching my dying bouquet like a shield, while Pietro Savelli leaned against the priest's desk with the casual confidence of a man who'd done this before. I don't understand, I managed, though my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. What do you want from me? I don't have Declan's money. I don't even know where he is. I know. He pulled out his phone, swiped through something, then turned the screen toward me. Frankfurt. He boarded a flight at 6 this morning using a passport under the name David Morrison. Very thorough. Very expensive. Took him 2 years to set up the identity. 2 years. We'd been together for 3. The math was a knife between my ribs. But you see, Verity, I don't want the money anymore. Pietro pocketed his phone, his dark eyes never leaving my face. Money is replaceable. Loyalty, however, that requires a different kind of currency. I'm not loyal to Declan. The words came out bitter. Obviously. No. But his sister Margot is. He said her name like he was reading from a list. She lives in Boston. Arlington Street. Red brick townhouse. She has twin daughters, Sophia and Grace, 7 years old. They attend the Montessori school on Beacon Hill. My blood turned to ice water. You wouldn't. I would. No hesitation. No remorse. Declan stole from the Savelli family. That demands retribution. The question is whether that retribution extends beyond him. The vestry walls seemed to press inward. I could barely pull air into my lungs past the constriction in my chest. She didn't do anything. Those little girls are innocent. Pietro straightened from the desk, taking a single step closer. Which is why I'm offering you an alternative. Here it was. The trap springing shut. Marry me. Today. Right now, in front of these witnesses. His voice was clinical, businesslike, as if he were proposing a merger instead of a life sentence. You'll take Declan's debt as your own. You'll become my wife in every legal sense. And in exchange, Margot and her daughters will never know I exist. That's insane. But even as I said it, I knew I would agree. Knew I had no choice. It's practical. He tilted his head, studying me like I was a painting he was considering acquiring. You get protection from Declan's other creditors, and believe me, there are others. I get a wife who understands the cost of betrayal. I'm not property, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. Something in me, some last fragment of pride, refused to break completely. I'm a person you're blackmailing. Say it correctly. Pietro's eyes narrowed. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but close. Fine. You're a person I'm blackmailing into marriage. He extended his hand. Do we have a deal? I looked at his outstretched palm. Then at the closed doors. Then at the future I'd thought I'd have burning to ash. Yes. The walk back into the cathedral felt like a procession to the gallows. Pietro's hand rested at the small of my back. Not guiding, not comforting, but claiming. Owning. Every guest still seated turned to stare as we emerged from the vestry, their expressions ranging from horror to morbid fascination. Sienna reached for me as we passed, but one of Pietro's men stepped smoothly into her path. The message was clear. I was beyond rescue now. The priest waited at the altar, his face the color of old parchment. His hands trembled as he opened the prayer book, and I wondered distantly if Pietro had threatened him too, or if the man simply recognized a predator when he saw one. "We are gathered here today." His voice cracked on the first word. I didn't hear the rest. The words washed over me like white noise as I stood beside a stranger who smelled of expensive cologne and unspoken violence. My grandmother's lace gown suddenly felt like a costume for a play I'd never auditioned for, the fabric suffocating against my skin. "Do you, Verity Catherine Ashford, take this man?" "I do." The words came out flat, mechanical. Somewhere in the back pews someone gasped. Pietro's turn. He repeated the vows in that accented voice, each word precise and deliberate, and I realized with sick clarity that he meant them. Not the love. Not the cherishing. But the possession. The binding legal claim he was making on my life in front of 200 witnesses. "The rings," the priest whispered. I hadn't thought about rings. My hand was bare except for the cheap promise ring Declan had given me a year ago, the one I'd planned to slip off before the real ceremony. But Pietro reached into his jacket and withdrew a small velvet box that looked decades old. The ring inside stole my breath. Platinum, heavy and ornate, with a center stone that caught the cathedral's light like fresh blood. Rubies. 3 of them, surrounded by smaller diamonds in a setting that spoke of old-world craftsmanship and older money. "My grandmother's," Pietro said quietly for my ears only. 3 generations of Savelli brides have worn it. He slid it onto my finger. It fit perfectly because of course it did. He'd known my size. He'd planned this. The weight of it was obscene. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The priest's voice broke on the last word. He didn't say the part about kissing the bride. Even he wasn't that cruel. But Pietro turned to me anyway, his hand coming up to cup my jaw with surprising gentleness. His thumb brushed my cheekbone, and his eyes held mine as he leaned close enough that his breath warmed my skin. He didn't kiss me. Instead, he whispered against my ear loud enough for the front pews to hear, "You belong to the Savelli family now." Then he straightened, took my hand in his and led me down the aisle. Past the frozen congregation. Past Sienna's tear-streaked face. Past the life I'd thought I was building. Into his. The SUV slid through iron gates that closed behind us with a hydraulic hiss that sounded like a tomb ceiling. I watched through tinted windows as we drove up a tree-lined driveway that seemed to stretch for miles, the Hudson River glittering through bare branches like shattered glass. Then the house came into view and my breath caught despite everything. It wasn't a house. It was a monument to wealth so old it had calcified into power. The Gilded Age mansion sprawled across the cliff top like a Renaissance palazzo transplanted to American soil. Limestone facade, copper-roofed turrets gone green with age, windows that reflected the afternoon sun like watching eyes. Beautiful. Terrible. A cage dressed in architectural splendor. "Welcome home," Pietro said from beside me, and the words felt like a threat. The circular drive was already occupied by 3 identical black SUVs. Men in dark suits moved with military precision across the grounds, and I counted at least 6 surveillance cameras just on the front entrance. One of the men wore an earpiece, his hand resting casually on his hip where I could see the outline of a weapon beneath his jacket. "How many people work here?" My voice sounded small in the SUV's leather interior. "Enough." Pietro opened his door then came around to open mine, a mockery of chivalry. The security team rotates in 12-hour shifts. You'll meet the household staff later. I stepped out onto cobblestones that probably cost more than my entire education, still wearing my grandmother's yellowed lace, still feeling the obscene weight of the ruby ring on my finger. The air smelled of river water and old money. Inside was worse. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, oil paintings in gilt frames that I recognized even from across the entrance hall. A Monet, a Degas, what looked like an actual Titian. Each one worth more than I'd earn in a lifetime. The wine cellar doubles as a panic room, Pietro said casually, gesturing to a doorway beneath the grand staircase. Reinforced steel, independent air supply, satellite phone. In case of emergency. In case of what emergency, I wanted to ask but didn't. Pietro. The voice came from the top of the stairs. An elderly woman descended with the careful dignity of someone who'd once moved like a queen. She was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, dressed entirely in black with silver hair pulled into a severe bun. But her eyes, dark and sharp as Pietro's, missed nothing as they swept over me. She spoke rapidly in Russian, words I couldn't understand but whose tone I recognized. Assessment, judgment, a question. Pietro responded in the same language, his voice softer than I'd heard it. The woman approached me and I forced myself not to step back as she reached up to touch my face, tilting it toward the light. Her fingers were cold. Her gaze was colder. Then she stepped back and said something that made Pietro's mouth twitch. "My grandmother says," he began. The old woman cut him off, nodding once. Then she patted my cheek almost fondly before turning and walking away, dismissing us both. "What did she say?" I asked. Pietro watched his grandmother disappear down the hallway, something unreadable crossing his face. "She said you won't break." He looked at me then, and for the first time I saw something that might have been respect. "She said that's good." Pietro's study was a room designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with leather-bound volumes in what looked like Russian, Italian, and English. The 4th wall was entirely glass, overlooking the Hudson where sailboats drifted like white butterflies in the failing light. And on every available surface, the mantel, the sideboard, even his massive mahogany desk, sat pieces of art that belonged in museums. A bronze Degas ballerina. A small Rembrandt sketch. What I was almost certain was a preparatory study for a Botticelli. "You're staring," Pietro said from where he stood at a bar cart, pouring amber liquid into cut crystal glasses. "You have a Botticelli study just sitting on your desk." I couldn't keep the conservator in me from protesting. "The humidity levels alone are carefully controlled. The house has a climate system that would make the Uffizi jealous." He crossed the room, offering me one of the glasses. "I'm not a barbarian, Verity. I didn't take the drink. Just a kidnapper. A husband." He set the rejected glass on a side table with deliberate precision. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Pietro settled into the leather chair behind his desk, gesturing for me to sit in one of the chairs across from him. When I remained standing, he shrugged, taking a sip of whatever expensive liquor he'd poured. "Let me explain how this will work," he said, his voice taking on the same clinical tone he'd used in the vestry. "You'll have your own wing. East side of the house, overlooking the garden. 3 bedrooms, private bathroom, sitting room. The staff will respect your privacy." How generous. The bitterness leaked through despite my best efforts. "You'll have full access to the library, the art gallery, the grounds within the fence line. A monthly allowance will be deposited into an account in your name, enough to cover any reasonable expenses." Reasonable by whose definition? Wine. He didn't smile, but something flickered in his eyes. "You're also free to continue your conservation work. I have contacts at several museums and private collections. Your student loans will be paid in full by the end of the week." That stopped me. $180,000, gone. The weight that had been crushing me for 5 years just erased. In exchange, Pietro continued, you'll attend family functions as my wife. Dinners, events, the occasional business meeting where appearances matter. You'll learn basic Russian, enough to follow conversation. And you'll accept the security detail. Security detail. I repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. You're a Savelli now. That makes you a target. He said it so matter-of-factly like he was discussing the weather. Marco will be your primary bodyguard. Former Spetsnaz, speaks 4 languages and has kept 3 generations of this family alive. You'll grow to appreciate him. The room felt smaller suddenly, the beautiful art pressing in like evidence of a life I hadn't chosen. I thought about Margot and her daughters. About the ruby ring cutting into my finger. About the fact that I'd agreed to this, said yes in front of 200 witnesses. My turn, I said. Pietro raised an eyebrow. Your turn. You laid out your terms. Here are mine. I stepped closer to his desk, planting my palms on the polished wood, leaning forward until we were eye level. No lies. I don't care how ugly the truth is, but I won't live in a house built on deception. Not again. Agreed. No violence in my presence. I don't care what your business involves, but I won't witness it. I won't be complicit. His jaw tightened slightly. That may not always be possible. Then make it possible. I didn't blink. And if someone threatens me, if this security detail you're forcing on me becomes necessary, I want to know why. I want full disclosure about what I'm really part of. You're asking for access to information that could get you killed. I'm asking for the truth about the man I just married. My voice didn't shake. About the family I apparently belong to now. About what business means when you say it like that. Pietro studied me for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Then he stood, circling the desk until we were inches apart. Up close, I could see the faint scar tissue at his collar, the silver threading through his dark hair, the weight of something that might have been respect. Fine, he said quietly. No lies. Limited exposure to violence. And access to the truth. He extended his hand. Do we have a deal, Mrs. Savelli? I looked at his outstretched palm. Then at the Botticelli study. Then at the window overlooking the Hudson, where the sun was setting like the world ending in gold and blood. We have a deal. His handshake was firm, warm, and absolutely terrifying. Mikhail Orlov arrived the next morning carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my first car. He was younger than I'd expected. Maybe 40, with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of tailored suit that whispered old European money. When he shook my hand, his grip was professional, distant, and his eyes held the careful neutrality of a man who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. Mrs. Savelli. He said my new name like it was already fact, already settled. Shall we? We met in the library, a room that smelled of old books and lemon oil, with windows overlooking formal gardens where men with earpieces patrolled disguised as groundskeepers. Pietro sat in a wing-back chair near the fireplace, watching me with that unreadable expression I was beginning to recognize as his default. Mikhail spread documents across the coffee table with practiced efficiency. The marriage contract, he began, pointing to the first page. Standard for families of the Savellis. Position. Standard. As if anything about this was standard. Your monthly allowance is set at $100,000, deposited on the first of each month into an account solely in your name. No restrictions, no oversight. It's yours to use as you see fit. I stared at the number. 100,000. Every month. I'd been living on 32,000 a year. Additionally, Mikhail continued, flipping pages, there is a trust fund of $10 million that will be activated in the event of Mr. Savelli's death. The principal is protected, but you'll have access to the interest immediately upon my death. Pietro interjected calmly, as if we were discussing stock portfolios instead of his mortality. Mikhail prefers euphemisms. The lawyer didn't flinch. There are also provisions for legal protection. Any outstanding debts or legal entanglements from your previous relationship are now the responsibility of Savelli family attorneys. We've already begun the process of settling your student loans and protecting you from Mr. Mercer's creditors. His creditors? My voice came out sharper than I intended. Declan Mercer borrowed from several sources to fund his lifestyle over the past 2 years. Not all of them were institutional lenders. Mikhail's pause was delicate. Some have already made inquiries about your whereabouts. Your marriage to Mr. Savelli provides immunity from such inquiries. The pieces started clicking together with sickening clarity. How long? I turned to Pietro. How long have you known about Declan's debts? About my situation? Pietro took a sip of his coffee, unhurried. Approximately 18 months. The room tilted. 18. You've been watching me for 1.5 years? Watching is such an unpleasant word. He set down his cup. I prefer maintaining awareness of potential liabilities. I'm a liability now? My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against my thighs to hide it. You were his fiancé. That made you relevant. Pietro stood, crossing to the window. When Declan first approached my foundation about the restoration project, I had him investigated. Standard protocol. What I found was interesting. A man living well beyond his means, engaged to a woman drowning in debt, making promises he couldn't keep. So you knew. The betrayal tasted like bile. You knew he was going to steal from you. I suspected. I gave him opportunity. When he took it, Pietro turned back to face me and his expression was utterly calm. I simply adjusted my plans accordingly. Mikhail cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Mrs. Savelli, if you'll just sign here and here and... He used Declan's theft as an excuse. The realization crashed over me like cold water. You could have stopped him months ago. You could have had him arrested, gotten your money back. But instead you waited. You waited until the wedding. Yes. The single word hung in the air between us. Why? My voice broke. Why go through all this? If you wanted, if you needed, I couldn't even finish the sentence. Pietro moved closer, stopping just at the edge of my personal space. Because I needed you to have no other options. No safety net. No rescue. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, which made it worse. I needed you desperate enough to say yes. And I needed it to be your choice. That's not a choice. That's entrapment. It's both. He didn't look away, didn't apologize. Sign the papers, Verity. Your student loans will disappear. Declan's creditors will forget your name. You'll have security, protection, resources you've never had before. At what cost? Pietro's smile was thin, almost sad. You already paid it. At the altar. I found the tracking device 3 days later, sewn into the silk lining of the cashmere coat that had appeared in my closet. One of a dozen pieces of clothing that had materialized overnight, all in my exact size, all obscenely expensive. The stitching was professional, nearly invisible. I only noticed it because I'd spent years examining textile conservation under magnification, training my eye to spot irregularities. The slight bulge near the hem. The pattern of thread that didn't quite match the original seam work. I dug it out with my fingernail and the device was smaller than a dime. Sophisticated. Military grade. My hands didn't shake as I walked through the mansion. They didn't shake as I pushed open the door to Pietro's study without knocking. They didn't shake until I slammed the tracker down on his desk hard enough to make his coffee cup rattle. What the hell is this? Pietro looked up from his laptop, glanced at the device, then back at me. GPS tracker. Accurate to within 3 meters. Battery life of approximately 6 months. I know what it is. My voice was steel-wrapped in fury. I want to know why it was sewn into my coat without my knowledge. Because you wouldn't have agreed to wear it otherwise. He closed his laptop with deliberate calm, giving me his full attention. Sit down, Verity. I'll stand. Suit yourself. He leaned back in his chair and I hated how comfortable he looked, how utterly unruffled by my rage. You're a target now. Every rival family knows you're mine. That tracker keeps you alive. By spying on me. By monitoring my every move like you're valuable, he interrupted. Like your leverage. Like you're the easiest way to hurt me that my enemies have had in years. The words landed like a slap. I grabbed the back of the chair I'd refused to sit in, needing something solid to hold on to. How many enemies? Enough. Pietro stood, moving to the sideboard where he kept his liquor. He poured 2 glasses of something amber without asking if I wanted one. The Bratva operates on a council system. 5 families in the New York territory, each with their own interests. The Savellis have held the chair for 3 generations, which makes us both respected and resented. He handed me a glass. This time I took it. The old guard believes in traditional structures. Hierarchies. Blood oaths and centuries-old alliances. He took a drink, his eyes distant. But there are younger factions who see those traditions as weaknesses. Who think the Bratva should evolve, expand, become something more American and less Russian. And you? I'm caught between worlds. A bitter smile. Too modern for the old guard, too traditional for the reformers. Which means everyone watches me. Everyone waits for me to make a mistake. And I'm the mistake. The realization settled into my bones like ice. You're a vulnerability, he corrected. An American wife with no Bratva blood, no family connections, no understanding of our codes. To some you're an insult to tradition. To others you're proof I'm weak, sentimental. I'm neither of those things. I know. His gaze met mine and something flickered there. Something that might have been respect. But they don't. And until they do, you're a target. The tracker isn't about control, Verity. It's about keeping you alive long enough to prove them wrong. I drank the liquor. It burned going down, expensive and smooth. What happens if they decide I'm more trouble than I'm worth? They won't decide that. I will. Pietro moved closer and his voice dropped to something almost gentle. This is the world you married into. Marriage here isn't romance. It's alliance. It's warfare with witnesses and legal documents. The moment I put my grandmother's ring on your finger, you became a piece on a board where the stakes are measured in blood. You should have warned me. You wouldn't have believed me. He wasn't wrong. The tracker is just the beginning. There are cameras on the grounds. Your bodyguard, Marco, reports your movements to me daily. Your phone is monitored. Your internet activity is logged. Each revelation was another violation, another reminder that I'd signed away more than my name. And if I object, then you die. No inflection. No drama. Just fact. The Volkov family would take you within a week. The Orlovs would make it look like an accident. The Kozlovs would send pieces of you back to me as a message. The glass slipped from my fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. Neither of us moved to clean it up. So I'm a prisoner. You're protected. Pietro stepped over the broken glass, close enough that I could see the scar at his collar, the one I'd noticed that first day. There's a difference. One keeps you trapped. The other keeps you breathing. I don't see the distinction. You will. He picked up the tracker from his desk, held it out to me. Take it. Keep it. Or flush it down the toilet if it makes you feel better. But understand this. I have 6 others placed throughout your wardrobe, your jewelry, even your shoes. The question isn't whether you're being tracked. It's whether you accept why. I stared at the device in his palm, this tiny piece of technology that represented everything wrong with my new life. Then I took it. I hate you, I said quietly. I know. Pietro's smile was sad knowing. But you'll hate me less when you're still alive next month. I couldn't sleep. 3 weeks in the mansion and my body still hadn't adjusted to the silence. No traffic noise. No sirens. Just the occasional creak of old wood settling and the soft footsteps of security patrols outside my windows. I pulled on a robe, silk, expensive, not mine, and wandered through hallways lit only by emergency lighting. The house felt different at night, less fortress and more mausoleum, all that wealth and history pressing down like accumulated centuries. Light spilled from beneath the gallery doors. I hesitated, my hand on the brass handle, remembering Pietro's words about boundaries and surveillance. But curiosity or maybe loneliness. One. I pushed the door open. He stood before the Caravaggio, so still he might have been part of the painting. The gallery's spotlights were dimmed, casting everything in shadow except for the brutal illumination of the canvas. Judith beheading Holofernes. Violence captured in oil and light. A woman's face calm as she severed a man's head, blood spraying in frozen arcs across the canvas. Couldn't sleep either? Pietro didn't turn, but somehow he'd known I was there. The silence is too loud. I moved closer, drawn despite myself to the painting. I'd forgotten you had this. The Uffizi thinks they have the original. They're wrong. A hint of satisfaction in his voice. My grandfather acquired this in 1952. The museum has a very good copy. I stopped myself. Legal. Criminal. But then that was the point, wasn't it? Chiaroscuro, Pietro said quietly. Light and dark. Caravaggio understood that beauty requires violence. That you can't have one without the other. I studied the painting. Judith's determined expression, the maidservant's practical focus, Holofernes' agony frozen in oil. He also understood that sometimes violence is necessary. Judith saved her people. Did she? Pietro's gaze remained fixed on the canvas. Or did she become the thing she fought against? A killer justifying murder with righteousness. The question hung in the dim gallery like smoke. Is that how you see yourself? I asked. Finally he looked at me. In the half-light, the shadows under his eyes were pronounced, his face more haggard than I'd seen it. I see myself as a man who inherited a throne he never wanted and can never leave. You were a doctoral candidate. The words came out before I could stop them. I found the dissertation. In the library. Renaissance Art Theory and the Commercialization of Violence. P. Savelli, Columbia University, 2015. Something flickered across his face. Surprise maybe, or pain. You read it. The first 3 chapters. It's brilliant. I moved to stand beside him, both of us facing the Caravaggio now. What happened? My father was murdered. Simple words carrying the weight of a collapsed future. February 23, 2015. I was 24 years old, defending my dissertation proposal, when Mikhail walked into the conference room and told me the Kozlov family had declared war. 3 weeks later I was sitting in my father's chair, making decisions about who lived and who died, and the university was calling to ask when I'd be returning. You never went back. How could I? His laugh was bitter. The Bratva doesn't take sabbaticals. There's no leaving, no retiring. You're born into it, or you marry into it, or you die trying to escape it. Like me, I thought. Married into it. Trapped. You could have left before, I said. Before your father died. You could have walked away. And abandoned my family. My grandmother. The people who depend on the Savelli name for protection. He shook his head. That's not how it works. Blood is obligation. Legacy is prison. But you wanted to leave. I wanted to study art. To write about beauty instead of creating violence. Pietro's voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. I wanted to be someone who looked at Caravaggio and saw genius, not a mirror. We stood in silence, the painting's violence frozen between us. I thought about the life he'd lost, the scholar buried beneath the Bratva king. The loneliness of power. The isolation of a throne. The tracker, I said finally. The surveillance. The guards. It's not just about protecting me, is it? No. He met my eyes, and for the first time I saw past the king to the man. The one who'd stood in a gallery at 2 a.m. staring at a stolen painting like it was the last beautiful thing left in the world. It's about protecting both of us. Because if they can take you, they can hurt me. And if they can hurt me, everything my father died for means nothing. That's a terrible way to live. It's the only way I know. Pietro turned back to the Caravaggio, to Judith's calm determination and Holofernes's frozen scream. Light and dark verity. Violence and beauty. You can't have one without the other. That's what Caravaggio understood. That's what this life demands. I should have left then. Should have walked back to my wing, to my silk sheets and my gilded cage. But instead I stayed beside him in the gallery, watching the way the light played across brutal oils. And for the first time since the cathedral, I saw Pietro Savelli not as my captor but as a man who was just as trapped as I was. Just in a more expensive prison. 4 months after the cathedral, I'd learned to read the estate's rhythms like a conservator reading pentimento beneath paint. I knew which guards changed shifts at 3 a.m. I knew Nana Ekaterina took her tea at precisely 4 p.m. I knew Pietro disappeared into his study on Thursday nights for calls he never explained. I'd learned basic Russian. Attended family dinners where conversations stopped when I entered. Smiled through charity galas where women in diamonds assessed me like I was livestock. I'd also learned that galleries were the one place Marco, my bodyguard, let his attention slip. The opening was at a private collection in Tribeca. Legitimate, prestigious. The kind of event where Pietro's presence lent respectability to his art foundation. I wore emerald silk and the ruby ring that had become part of my body, and I studied a Modigliani while Marco checked his phone near the champagne. I didn't see them coming until hands gripped my arms, and a voice whispered in Russian-accented English, "Scream and everyone dies." The service exit. A panel van. Duct tape and zip ties. The city blurring past tinted windows while my mind calculated angles, exits, odds. Marco would notice in minutes. Pietro would know in 5. But that might be 4 minutes too late. They took me to a warehouse in Red Hook, all exposed brick and rusted machinery. 3 men, 1 woman, older, scarred, her eyes cold as frozen vodka. "Volkov sends his regards," she said, lighting a cigarette. "Your husband embarrassed him at the council last month. This is how we restore balance. By kidnapping me?" My voice was steadier than I felt. "By making Pietro Savelli kneel." She smiled. "He'll trade anything for you. Territory. Alliances. Maybe his life." They left me zip-tied to a chair in a windowless room, guarded by the youngest of the 3 men, barely 20, more nervous than cruel. I could hear them arguing in the next room about ransom calls and deadlines. The room had been an office once. Desk. Filing cabinet. And on the wall a print of a Vermeer, girl with a pearl earring, faded and water-damaged. "Do you know what a fugitive pigment is?" I asked the guard in Russian I'd learned from Nana's lessons. He blinked. "What?" "Some paints fade. Change color over time." I nodded toward the print. "That Vermeer used expensive pigments. Stable ones. But there are cheaper versions, fugitive colors that decay, that become something else entirely. Why do I care? Because in the next room there's a painting leaning against the wall. Small landscape. Probably worth 50,000. And I can forge you something worth 500,000 if you let me use it." Great. It flickered across his face like lightning. 2 hours later, I'd transformed a mediocre Hudson River School painting into something remarkable using supplies from their own operation. They'd been fencing art, naturally. The guard watched, fascinated, as I added layers, aged the surface, created provenance that would fool anyone who wasn't me. "This gets you safe passage," I told him, signing a famous forger's name in the corner. "To Prague, Amsterdam, anywhere. Sell it quietly, live like a king. And you?" I walk out that door. You tell them I escaped. By the time they realize I bought my freedom with a fake, you're gone. He considered. Then cut my zip ties. I called Pietro from a bodega pay phone 6 blocks away, rain soaking through my silk dress. "I saved myself," I said when he answered. "Come get me." 20 minutes later his SUV pulled up. Pietro emerged into the rain, flanked by armed men, his face a mask of controlled fury. But when he saw me soaked, shivering, alive, something cracked. Verity. I'm not your property, I interrupted and my voice didn't shake. I never was. You took me because I had no options, because you needed someone you could control, because the debt was an excuse. Yes. No lies. Never lies. Not between us. But I'm not that woman anymore. I stepped closer, rain streaming down my face. I learned your world. I survived your enemies. I saved myself when I needed saving. So here's the truth, Pietro Savelli. I'm not your property. But I choose to stay. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, disbelief, something raw and unguarded. Then he knelt. In the rain, in front of his men, in the middle of a red hook street, the Bratva king knelt before me. Then let me earn you, he said quietly. Not as payment. Not as arrangement. Let me earn the choice you're making. I looked down at him. This dangerous, complicated man who'd stolen my future and given me a different one. Who'd caged me and protected me. Who'd seen me when no one else had. Get up, I said softly. And take me home. He rose, and when he pulled me against him, his hands shaking slightly, I realized we were both prisoners of different cages. But maybe, just maybe, we could find freedom together. In the violence. In the beauty. In the choice to stay when leaving was finally possible.